America is facing a crisis. Everywhere you look, the headlines talk about worker shortages and not enough people to keep the economy running. But what if the real danger isn't too few workers, but too little work? What if millions of Americans went searching for employment only to discover there is nothing available? On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're asking why the U.S. might actually be running out of jobs and what that means for the future of work. While the U.S. economy is generally doing well these days, the job market in the U.S. has people worried. The job growth estimate has been downgraded, with totals for May and June being revised down by a combined 258,000 jobs. Employers added 250,000 fewer jobs in the second quarter of 2025 than they did in the last. In fact, some analysts are saying that this is the worst job growth observed in decades outside of a recession. A lot of people will say, well, of course we're seeing fewer jobs, the AI revolution is here. But it's actually not that simple. Artificial intelligence is playing a part in the shrinking job market, but it doesn't tell the full story. So why is the US running out of jobs? Let's start with one of the simpler explanations. The rise of remote work has changed the playing field for American workers. The 2000 U.S. Census found that just 3.2% of American workers, about 4.2 million people, worked from home. By 2020, before the pandemic, that number had more than doubled to 7.3% of the labor force, or around 11 million people. Then the lockdown hit and remote work exploded. In only a year, the share of Americans working from home soared to 17.9% by 2021. While some did eventually transition back to part-time or full-time office jobs, many never did. Since the end of 2023, 13.8% of workers are still fully remote. Now, for tax and other reasons, some companies can't hire remote workers outside of the U.S., but a fair amount can, leading to U.S. workers suddenly competing not only with similarly skilled workers around the country, but similarly skilled workers globally. According to Revelio Labs, global companies with U.S. headquarters have been hiring international workers at a much faster rate than domestic workers. Between 2019 and 2025, the number of onshore workers grew by 16.7%. But offshore workers grew by 32%, nearly twice as fast, and these aren't low-wage roles. Huge corporations like Salesforce are laying off high-paid staff in their Bay Area offices in favor of international talent. While only 5% of companies were open to hiring international remote workers in 2019, by the end of 2020, that number had jumped to 10%. In 2022, companies seemed even more willing to hire globally, with the State of Global Hiring report finding that 64% of U.S. companies were either expanding international hiring or planning to. This leaves U.S. workers either shut out of those markets entirely or forced to compete fiercely for what's left. Increasingly, company job postings aren't aimed at Americans, or at least not Americans alone. And as if things couldn't get worse, some other workers are being replaced with, well, no one whatsoever. Well, except ChatGPT, or Claude, or Cursor. The rise of artificial intelligence, and specifically LLMs or large language models, is on the verge of making some jobs obsolete. According to Coursera, entry-level roles are the most at risk, especially in manufacturing, clerical work, transportation, retail, and sales. You might still need a senior developer or experienced lawyer to oversee what an LLM is spitting out, but you don't need as many paralegals or junior coders to help them. However, many economists and tech experts warn that this could trigger a long-term labor crisis. After all, senior developers start off as juniors, and future lawyers often gain experience as paralegals. But if a team of 5 junior staff led by a veteran is replaced with one veteran using an AI assistant, where does the next generation get the training they need to become tomorrow's experts? Some people have probably already seen AI take their jobs, though most companies are hesitant to say so openly. In the spring of 2025, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella announced in April that 30% of the company's code was now being written by AI, and then in May fired 6,000 employees. Just to really ram home the point, another 9,000 were let go in July, equating to 4% of the company's international workforce, which would appear to be related events. In fact, almost all of the tech giants, including Google, Meta, and Amazon, have conducted massive layoffs since 2022. Meta laid off 3,600 people in the beginning of 2025, and companies like IBM cut 8,000 jobs in HR and other departments as it increasingly uses AI to complete administrative tasks. And the problem doesn't just lie in tech. In June 2023, IKEA, in an effort to make its customer service as confusing as its assembly line instructions, said they would start phasing out their customer service agents in favor of an AI bot named Billy. Duolingo is one of the few companies that seems openly proud of firing workers in favor of AI. They made headlines in January 2024 when they announced they'll let go 10% of their contractors in favor of using AI to translate content. And that's why nobody likes the owl. We should point out that some industry experts and commentators actually doubt that these layoffs are because of AI replacing human workers. Menlo Ventures' Didi Das says layoffs are happening because the big tech companies need huge amounts of cash for investments in AI data centers. Tech advisor and entrepreneur Wes Roth says this isn't about AI replacing humans yet, it's about restructuring to fund AI initiatives. However, even if this is the case, it still means that some of the world's biggest companies are betting more on an AI-led future rather than on their own experienced workers. That's bad news for future generations, and some of them already sense it. There's always a slight gap between unemployment rates for all college graduates and those for recent college graduates, but at the beginning of 2025, the gap has been getting unnaturally big for an economy not in recession. According to the New York Federal Reserve, labor conditions have deteriorated noticeably. While the unemployment rate for all college graduates is 2.7%, the rate for recent college graduates, 22 to 27 years old, was 5.8% in March 2025. That is higher than the general unemployment rate of 4.2%. It doesn't even matter how good of a school you go to. Harvard Business School told the Wall Street Journal that 23% of its MBAs actively looking for work were still unemployed 3 months later. While that may not sound like a long time, it is surprising for graduates coming from one of the most prestigious universities in the world. Many tech experts have justifiable questions about how useful LLMs are without human oversight and if they can really outright replace human labor. But at the end of the day, if managers are convinced AI can do a better job, regardless of how true it is or not, people are going to get fired. Perhaps that's why many people are now encouraging kids to learn a trade instead of getting a degree for a white-collar job. That way, they can walk away with less student debt and more practical real-world skills that would be harder for something like AI to replace. But skilled trades and manufacturing jobs have been facing their own challenges for some time and may face more in the future. You might have noticed we mentioned manufacturing as one of the industries that'll be affected by AI. For skilled trades, there is in fact a labor shortage at the moment, but learning a trade may not be enough to grab a job in construction in the coming years. According to Just Construction Specialist Recruitment, the best contractors are no longer just hiring based on tools in the belt. They're hiring based on tech fluency. Tools like layout robots, drywall tapers, used to handle repetitive taping and mudding, and rebar tying machines are already common on job sites in the US and UK. The prevalence of automation and robots on construction sites, as well as in other trades like plumbing and electrical work, are only expected to increase in the future. And so even though skilled trades are likely among the last jobs that will be fully replaced by robots, the kinds of skills a tradesman requires are going to change very fast soon. And they'll require a lot more training and education, one most people can't afford. Not to mention, even those trades are still subject to increasing automation, something that has a profound effect on both jobs and wages, with a surprising statistic you'll hear about in the next section. Because despite multiple politicians' promises to bring manufacturing jobs back to the US, this mass reversal of job outsourcing has never really materialized. Jobs were outsourced in the first place because of lower labor costs abroad, as well as the US's growing deficit with major manufacturing countries. The Economic Policy Institute estimated that a growing trade deficit with China cost 3.7 million US jobs between 2001 and 2018. Even if the US raised import costs and cut domestic wages enough to make factory workers competitive with cheap foreign labor, it still wouldn't solve the problem. Outsourcing might have taken away US manufacturing jobs, but now something else has replaced them entirely: automation. See, manufacturing output in the US continues to be near their peak, with 2025 levels just 5.5% below the country's all-time high in 2007, when a huge chunk of manufacturing jobs had already disappeared. In 1979, at the peak of manufacturing employment, 22% of the non-farm workforce in the US was working in manufacturing, a total of 19.5 million workers. In 2023, that number stood at 12 million workers, or just 8.3% of the non-farm workforce. Meanwhile, according to the Brookings Institution, the manufacturing sector still generates $2.9 trillion for the U.S. economy, with output rising fast during the 1980s and 1990s, the same time when the labor in the sector was quickly falling. And today, even though the number of manufacturing jobs is smaller than ever, the US was still the world's third largest steel producer in 2020. It was also the second largest automaker and largest aerospace exporter in 2021. Overall, the country was second worldwide in terms of manufacturing power, producing 16% of global output, coming in only behind China, which, it should be mentioned, has over 4 times the US population. Because most of the work has been taken over by machines for decades now. MIT economist and professor Darren Acemoglu found that between 1990 and 2007, adding just 1 robot per 1,000 workers reduced the employment-to-population ratio by 0.2% and lowered wages by 0.4%. Why would your boss pay someone when they could just hire a robot that never asks about health benefits or having food? This translates to each robot doing the work of roughly 3.3 workers. Not to mention, manufacturers can't even fill the job openings they have now. Consultancy firm Deloitte teamed up with the Manufacturing Institute in 2024 to survey more than 200 manufacturing companies on what their major challenges are. Over 65% of the companies surveyed listed hiring and retaining workers as their #1 challenge. That's not even mentioning the fact that many manufacturing workers are relatively old, meaning a wave of retirements is increasingly sweeping the sector. It's predicted that manufacturing will need 3.8 million extra workers by 2033, but up to 1.9 million of these jobs could go unfilled if workforce challenges are not addressed. But due to automation, only 2 in 5 manufacturing jobs these days are actually involved in making stuff at all, meaning 3 out of 5 jobs mostly require a college degree, as they're in design, engineering, research, development, sales, and finance, to name a few. The very things that many big tech firms believe will be replaced by AI. Carolyn Lee, president and executive director of the Manufacturing Institute, puts the number of manufacturing jobs that require at least a bachelor's degree at roughly half of all the current open positions. And that percentage is expected to increase in the future as manufacturing becomes more advanced in high tech. It's part of a broader transition toward an economy where humans oversee machines rather than operate them or compete against them. But what about in-person or at least customer-facing service jobs? Customer service, retail jobs, food service, taxi, and Uber drivers. They are all gone. The emergence of chatbots and customer service agents entirely powered by AI is increasingly making customer service jobs a relic of the past. One McKinsey study found that AI-powered chatbots reduce operational support costs by 30%. The unspoken part of that study is costs are reduced because people are fired. Giant companies like Lyft and Bank of America have introduced their own AI assistants or are using services like Claude AI to handle customer service. Lyft found that replacing human agents with Claude reduced resolution times by 87%. Meanwhile, Bank of America's Erica chatbot has handled over 1.5 billion customer service interactions. Self-service kiosks at retail stores and fast food chains, in addition to self-service checkout counters in supermarkets and big box stores, are decreasing the need for customer-facing service jobs as well. According to RestroWorks, the number of restaurant kiosks installed worldwide between 2021 and 2023 increased by 43%, reaching 350,000 installations, over 1/5 of them in the United States. By 2028, the number of kiosks is projected to double to 700,000 units internationally. In fact, according to Oysterlink, 30% of fast food locations in the US already use self-service kiosks in 2025, and that number is expected to increase to 50% by 2026. Workers at fast food chains like McDonald's, Burger King, and KFC are understandably nervous about this new tech coming for their jobs. One study by Cornerstone Capital Group found that up to 1.5 million fast food jobs could be replaced by 2025 because of the kiosks. But as of August 2025, the swaths of job losses haven't really materialized in the way that people thought. Fast food employees have been mostly shuffled around to other roles. But considering that the surge in this tech's use has been relatively recent, anxieties remain about the future. As far as taxi drivers or even truckers go, the coming years are looking pretty grim for them as well. Companies like Waymo have already rolled out fully automated robo-taxis to shuttle people around. A white paper on autonomous driving by the World Economic Forum predicts that by 2035, fleets of robotaxis will be operating in anywhere from 40 to 80 cities, mostly within the US and China. These driverless vehicles are also set to transform the entire sector of trucking and logistics. The same paper estimates that by 2035, for mid-distance hub-to-hub routes, autonomous trucks will make up 29% of new purchases in the United States and around 26% in Europe. After all, robo-trucks, unlike truck drivers, don't need to rest, stop to eat, or get tired while driving. And most importantly for the companies that employ them, they don't need to get paid, after the initial purchase of the technology at least. Maybe all of this tech and automation is why some companies these days are experiencing rapid growth and increasing profits without hiring humans at all. In fact, many are letting their highly experienced employees go. According to Live Data Technologies, U.S. public companies have reduced their white-collar workforce by 3.5% between 2022 and 2025. The highest-performing companies are even more convinced of the philosophy, less is more. 20% of S&P 500 companies have shrunk between 2015 and 2025 while maintaining or even improving their financial status. While the future is creating more jobs in sectors like tech and green energy, these positions are fewer in number. They're also more specialized and often require advanced degrees or niche skills. For most people, that means high costs or student debt. So what happens when millions of Americans are willing to work, but the system just doesn't need them? Some argue that a laborless future is actually kinda great. Let AI and the robots do the work for us. All we need is a universal basic income to keep people at a decent standard of living, and we'll be set for life. We can spend more time with our friends and family, learning to make pasta from scratch, and finally becoming fluent in French, or just watching Netflix and playing Stardew Valley all day. Whatever works. But Universal Basic Income, or UBI, has some major issues, mainly the unlikelihood it will ever be done. People who are against the implementation of UBI argue that it would disincentivize people to work. However, we're talking about a theoretically jobless future here, so that argument isn't as relevant. The more relevant issue is that instituting a UBI would be expensive. Mark Jaffe, visiting fellow at the California Policy Center, estimated that just a $2,000 UBI per head of household in the U.S. would cost around $2.3 trillion a year. Even if all federal, state, and local assistance programs meant to help the poor were eliminated, as the UBI would theoretically be taking care of all those needs, that only eliminates $810 billion in funding. That means a relatively low UBI would still require an extra $1.4 trillion a year in the budget. And that is not even touching the fact that in a country where the average rent alone is about $2,100 per month, no household can survive on $2,000 per month. So to institute a UBI that would actually keep entire families afloat, never mind thriving, would require trillions the country doesn't have. And in a jobless future, the US will have even less of a budget for such ideas. Since no one will be working, no one will be taxed. What earned income can the federal government tax if the majority of people aren't collecting paychecks? In theory, the government could respond by heavily taxing the multimillionaires, billionaires, and corporations enriched by an AI-powered, fully automated economy, but in practice that seems unlikely. The top marginal tax rate has fallen from 92% in 1953 to just 37% in 2023, according to the Tax Policy Center. Today, anyone earning over $609,000 pays only 37% on income above that threshold, and politicians show little appetite for taxing the same wealthy donors who fund their campaigns. So, in sum, a universal basic income is a non-starter. Will we redefine what counts as a job? It's hard to imagine how. Automation now threatens everyone, from blue-collar factory workers to some of the highest-paid professionals. More likely, a huge portion of the population will simply be left behind, forgotten by an economy and society that no longer has a place for them, despite doing everything they were supposed to do. And what happens then, besides mass unemployment and poverty? First of all, a lot of the companies that got rich off of firing almost all of their human workers and replacing them with machines are going to face serious challenges. No one will have the money to buy their products and use their services. If huge employers like Amazon, Walmart, and Apple replace over 90% of their human workforce with machines, who is going to buy books off of Amazon, or clothes, or toys, or an iPhone? And history has shown that a generation of poor, angry young people with no future and few elites becoming trillionaires rarely ends well for anyone. While the US might be running out of jobs, some people are making their exits unforgettable. Check out Most Epic Ways People Quit Their Jobs, Funny True Stories, to see just how creative quitting can get, or click on this video instead.